Okay, we are recording, and this is episode 8 of Roaming Free Inside the Cage. So we're already 2 months in, if you can believe it. And yeah, we're already on page 163. So we are really making tracks, even though we cheated. So we went through the introduction and then we jumped to Appendix A, and now we're just finishing that up. And then we're going to hit Appendix B, and then we're going to go back to the top. So there was information in these two appendices that I thought were really grounding for us, because he admits that he doesn't flesh it out as much. It's kind of a work in progress as you go through the book. But I thought for us to have some grounding, especially for those of us who are not familiar with either the Tao or the Enneagram. So we're going to finish up Appendix A. Maybe we'll get into Appendix B, but you know how we are, so it probably won't happen. Um, Before we dive in there, is there anything from last week that you want to bring up? Any unfinished business? Something you were thinking about, something that was left kind of undeveloped?
Yeah, so I wrote notes um after our meeting. When we were talking about core convictions versus our construct. And I said, we as people, we hang on to our beliefs strongly because that gives us comfort and it feels safe. But then here comes the challenge. How do I don't have enough wisdom to know I'm hanging on because um that's what makes me feel safe versus I'm hanging on because that's my conviction. Then I'll look around the world and I say, see, there you go. See, that proves I'm right. So that's my confirmation bias versus, right?
Mhm.
Versus, what's the other word? That's the truth in me that I see the big T.
Mhm.
Until somebody points out to me, somebody who's wiser than I am, saying, oh no, this is this. I don't have that.
Okay, so Ellen, if we take a Taoist approach to this, and I think it's Jesus' approach as well, we're not so much looking for beliefs that are intrinsically right or wrong. Okay, just in the abstract. That would come down to trying to judge something in the abstract. This is right, this is wrong, or trying to listen to outside opinion or whatever. I mean, that is chasing your tail. You can run around that maypole forever and really never come up with a conclusion. I think what we're really looking for, instead of looking at what's right and wrong necessarily, is looking at what works and what doesn't work, in the sense of, once again, does this core belief, does this belief system that you are holding on to still allow you to accept life on life's terms, live with a sense of hope and gratitude? Does it allow you to be able to be present and vulnerable in your relationships so that your relationships are close? Or is it keeping you shelved off? Is it keeping you with a sense of us versus them? I mean, those are some empirical things that you can look at in your life to see, how is your belief system serving you and serving your walk toward complete connection, which is really what this life is all about. And so rather than trying to judge the belief itself, look at the effect. What is it actually doing in your life? And I think that may give you a clearer idea of whether something has become limiting in your life or not. And I hope that makes some sense. Any other thoughts or rebuttals on that?
Well, I read ahead because I went to go visit a friend and I had the time. And I thought I was totally lost on this whole program, but I don't think I was because when we went up to Lakeport to visit a friend, another girlfriend and me, and when we got there, she, talking and everything, she kind of had some frustrations. And so a lot of times when you put yourself out there as a Christian, you get asked these kind of questions that are, you know, that people who don't know you wouldn't ask these things. But she said to me, if you believe in God, then why did he let Gaza happen? And when you're asked a question like that, it's not just about Gaza, it's about, Christianity and your faith and everything. And in the past, I haven't really been able to give a good rebuttal or a good response. But I was reading ahead in this intro or this chapter, just finished it, and they talked about the circle of where you just go round and round with your opinions, which is what I feel like I have done in the past. And it hasn't been successful. So I just said to her, I told her about this class and I told her that I was having a hard time understanding it, but I thought that it was essential for my growth. And I went on to say, I don't have the knowledge of everything that happens, but I know that no matter what, that you and I are suffering, no matter what we think or do, that we feel this suffering for the people of Gaza. And I feel that just being able to acknowledge that, and I didn't have an answer other than to say that, there was an ease about her, and that I didn't have to defend God. I didn't, have to defend my own Christianity, but that made it to a point where it was flowing. I don't know how to explain it, but I do feel that I'm like, I must be learning something if I'm saying these things. And I'm getting a response that is much more what I had hoped for. Let's put it that way.
That's great, Jennifer. That's great. Yeah, that's it. What this should do for us is allow us to be able to move kind of like a laser to our common points as human beings. We're going to move beyond what divides us intellectually and the core beliefs that Ellen was talking about, down to that universal point of connection. And that's what this is all about. In the next appendices, where we're going to talk about the pivot of the Tao, that's what we're talking about, that center of the wheel. What does that mean? How do we get there? And the fact that you can't really express it is part of what you're talking about, and part of what we've been talking about all along in terms of contemplation and mysticism. We can't express it, but we sure can experience it. And the experience of that can give us a conviction that will be as good as a certainty in terms of being able to navigate us through life. And that's the best that we can do as human beings. So that's great. These kinds of insights, I hope, are also part of what is guiding us toward understanding better what it is that we're doing here. And I'm hoping that when we get through these two appendices, you'll have a clearer idea of why he picked the Tao to help illustrate the Enneagram and how the two can work hand in glove. So why don't, with that, let's dig in here. This appendix was about a history and philosophy of the Enneagram. So the first section of it was a brief history, from its very beginnings in ancient Mesopotamia and then through to contemporary times. Then he pivoted to the philosophical assumptions, and that's what we've been talking about for the last couple of pages. And I wanted to back up to the last paragraph on page 163, just so we can get a running start on the new material as we finish this out. He says, I do not want to waste time debating which philosophical prism, empiricism or Taoism, is superior. Now, the last couple of pages, he really went through a look at what empiricism is. It's the scientific method that has been with us for the last 500 years since the Enlightenment in Europe. And we are all children of that Enlightenment. And so the way we look at the world now with hyper-rationalism, with the scientific method, with looking at what is accurate, and accurate from a scientific point of view is what is true. So if it's accurate, it's true. And if it's true, it has to be accurate. And so all of those create a completely different worldview. And this is a worldview we're living in, which makes it so much more difficult for us to be able to break through that worldview into what Jesus is talking about in terms of viewing the life from a contemplative or mystical point of view, or from a Taoist point of view. And the Enneagram is part of that whole contemplative and mystical tradition. And so it's all wrapped up together. So what we're trying to do is kind of work against what we have been taught our whole lives in Western culture in order to be able to approach life, approach our spiritual transformation and journeys from this different point of view. So he says, I don't want to waste time, though, debating which philosophical prism, empiricism or Taoism, is superior. In fact, I think that to even raise the question which one is true is to fall back into the empiricist habit of looking for the true reality behind the appearances. All knowledge implies a point of view. My point of view is just my current myth about reality. And we spent a lot of time with that last week, that we all have a point of view. Now, let's be really clear here. We have a very negative connotation of myth, especially as it relates to religion and Christianity. We think of a myth as something that's not true. And I was trying to remember the quote from Marcus Borg, and I remembered it, of course, after we hung up last week. But it's simply that myth is stories about the way things never were, but always are. Did you get that? Myth is
Yes.
stories about the way things never were, but always are. In other words, yeah, the stories themselves aren't accurate, but they are presenting a deeper truth that is perennial, that perennial wisdom. It's always true. It's true in terms of our psyches and our emotions and our experience as human beings. It's true about our spiritual connection and so on and so forth. So myth is
Dave,
not
who said that? I'm sorry. Who said
Marcus,
that?
Marcus Borg, B-O-R-G, like Star Trek Borg. Um, and so we all have a personal story that we are going to tell ourselves about reality, which isn't necessarily accurate, but it's true because, again, just like when Ellen was asking the question about her core values, her core beliefs, um, if they're working for us, if they are allowing us to move through life with the kind of spiritual integrity we're looking for, then within those parameters, it's true. Now, the next trauma that comes along is going to break through those parameters, and then we're going to have to reevaluate. Um, that doesn't mean there's no objective truth. It means that we all have a personal theology and philosophy that we're working with at a time. So he says, my point of view is just my current myth about reality. True, we have some choice as to which myth we will use to understand the world. The only choice we cannot make is to have no myth at all. Every human being needs a point from which they can cultivate their meaning and purpose in life, their sense of identity. That's what we're talking about here. In this regard, it is important to note that Western classical empiricism was the first large-scale intellectual tradition to claim that it had no myth. It presented itself as absolute knowledge, reality seen from no viewpoint at all, objective truth stripped of all subjective bias. That claim possessed only relative validity. The beauty of empirical science lies precisely in the fact that salt is sodium chloride in the 5th century as well as the 21st, in New York as well as in Beijing, on the table of a pauper or of a king. Empirical science is the most brilliant strategy ever devised to investigate the physical environment's interrelationships. It only goes amok when it alleges that the physical environment is the only one possible worth investigating. Empirical process does not work well with spirituality, as we have found. So he says, let's take another look at that grain of salt. For Western science, the reality or true meaning of anything in its essence is not its appearance or its feel. Essences are objective and unchanging. Their effects can be predicted. Appearances and feelings are notoriously subjective and changeable. Okay, so essences are objective and unchanging. Appearances and feelings are notoriously subjective and changeable. They constantly take us by surprise. In the eyes of empirical science, salt is really a molecule of one atom of sodium and another of chlorine. The deliciously biting taste of salt on my tongue as I sip a margarita somewhere on the southwestern shore of Mexico is a happy but entirely subjective result of this molecular state of affairs, produced by electrochemical changes taking place somewhere between my tongue and my brain. And what about the plush golden sunset I enjoy while I sip my drink? Well, From a purely objective point of view, a sunset is merely the apparent movement of the sun caused by the rotation of the earth, while the vermilion sky is actually a specific frequency of visible light that happens to be more abundantly diffused when the sun is viewed through longer distances of atmosphere, such as occur at sunset or sunrise. And what, finally, is the feeling of awe washing over me as I watch the sun slip into the Pacific Ocean? Is it just a specific state of arousal, relaxation caused by electrical chemical changes within my nervous system as the neurons of my optic nerve present the vermilion spectrum to the visual centers of my cortex, which of course has been pleasantly prepared for the experience by the alcohol in my margarita? I may enjoy the tastes and feelings far more than the explanations, but empiricist metaphysics nevertheless assures me that the explanations are more objectively real than my subjective experience. Empiricism has influenced, some might say afflicted, European thought and culture for over 500 years. The search for predictability, and I would say certainty, we can probably insert there, right? The search for certainty, for predictability within variety, causes us to see the world as made up of things rather than events. For things seem more stable than processes. So our Western eyes look at flowing water, but what they see is a river. Or they register the felt hopelessness and fear of a weathered face, but what they see is a street person. The search for predictability, for certainty, also leads us to value the abstract idea over the concrete experience. We want to know the temperature rather than to step outside and feel the air of this very day. We prefer digital to analog in just about every gadget. We think it more helpful to calculate the per capita income, I think he meant per capita income, of Sudan than to ponder the photograph of a starving baby. There's a lot of really important thoughts in here. Moving back up to the middle of the paragraph, our Western eyes look at flowing water, but what they see is a river. Look at a weathered face, but what they see is a street person. When we talk about contemplation, what we've often talked about, especially in sensory walks, is that try to experience everything, be hyper aware of everything that you see, feel, taste, and so on and so forth, but try not to name it. Remember that? Try not to name what you see. Because as soon as we name it, we're changing it. As soon as we name it, and it's so instructive in the Hebrew to name something in Hebrew culture, ancient culture, to name something is to show dominion over it. So when Adam named all the animals, was given permission to name all the animals in the garden, it was basically saying mankind had dominion over the animals, over all the rest of creation. Parents get to name their children. They have dominion over their children. That's why the Jews were not allowed to name God, because they couldn't say the name. That would show dominion over it, over God. The things that we name are the things that we imagine that we're controlling somehow. This is a river. We think we know what that means. We understand river. We understand street person. We understand whatever we put a label to. And then also it gives us a sense of safety. It's now something that's compartmentalized. It's something that's in its pigeonhole. We can keep it at arm's length. It's much easier for us to deal with the abstract idea of something than to actually move in and experience the reality of it up close. I think it's beautiful in the Psalms. The line is, taste and see that the Lord is good. Taste and see. I mean, there is nothing more intimate and vulnerable than what you put in your mouth. I mean, is there really? You know, Remember those movies where someone hands a poisoned drink to somebody else, and you're watching that person with the drink, and you know it's poisoned, and the poisoner knows it's poison, but the person who's got it doesn't. And they're walking around with it, they start to drink, and then they stop, and the other person's watching them. As soon as they take that sip, you see the other person's face, and they know it's all over. They got them now, right? What we put into ourselves, what we actually taste, is something that we can no longer control. We're on for a ride, right? Taste and see that the Lord is good. It's so different than just naming God from afar and thinking that we somehow understand intellectually. And so this is a whole different way of experiencing life. And for the last 500 years, with empiricism becoming the basic foundation, of our culture's worldview. We have given ourselves over to experiencing everything from afar, from a safe perch, from a lab somewhere with a white lab coat and a clipboard. And we're insulated from electrically from the earth and so on and so forth. We're separate from. And if we're really going to practice contemplative spirituality, if we're really going to take this journey that the Enneagram has for us, man, we're going to have to immerse. We're going to have to dive in. And it's a whole different way of experiencing life. Thoughts? Comments?
It's so interesting to me how that search for predictability fits so well with our human thirst and an unquenchable thirst for certainty. And I think that's why it has such a strong foothold, because we're not certain of anything, truth be told. So it's just a major defense mechanism, the way I look at it.
I love that line that all human neuroses flow from an intolerance of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, put that on your fridge and contemplate it, because it is so true. Yeah.
Who said that?
I have no idea.
Oh.
I
It
just
was
remember
me.
it.
I said, I will if you repeat it. I'll put it on my.
Did you say you wanted me to repeat it, Lori? Human neuroses flow from all human neuroses flow from an intolerance of uncertainty. We all want certainty. We want certainty against all the unknowns of life. We want certainty against death and our mortality salience. The thing that makes us crazy is the unknown. If we can't learn somehow to tolerate uncertainty, then we're always going to be living in fear. And that's what this way of Jesus is all about, right? It's a way to live fearlessly. It's a way to live vulnerably, fearlessly, vulnerably. And you can't do it from a safe perch. Going to have to dive in.
Hey, let me ask you this, Dave, real quick. Do you think the disciples, when they were walking with Jesus, do you think they feared death after they see him do the miracles, raise people from the dead? Do you think they had more certainty than we do today because they got to see him face to face in human form?
Absolutely, they still feared death. Take a look at where they were at the time of the crucifixion. They were running scared. Peter was denying that he knew Jesus. They were hiding up in the upper room. They were hiding from the guards. They were hiding from their shadows. Of course they still feared death. So
because of human nature or what?
I'm sorry?
Because we're human nature.
Human nature, absolutely. Fear of the unknown, all of the above. And of course, by the time the crucifixion rolls around, the disciples still didn't understand what Jesus was really all about. It wasn't until Pentecost that they finally came into the full understanding. But even then, the last story of Peter, and it's not biblical, it's just traditional, but he was running away from Rome because the persecution was taking effect, and he meets Jesus going the other way. Where are you going, Lord? Well, I'm going to be crucified. And Peter realizes he was doing it again. He was running away. And so he turns around and dutifully goes back and is martyred there in Rome. But it's the human condition, it's not so much that we still have a fear of the unknown. It's whether that fear becomes debilitating, paralyzing or not. It's whether it actually ends up limiting us, limiting our ability to really be fully present and vulnerable and connected. It's not the fear that is either our fault or anything that's wrong with us. It's our choices that we make that we're responsible for. And so, yeah, kind of keep that in mind too. It's not that we're not going to feel any fear, but we will be able to move through it. That's
I think it's also a shifting of focus on motion, because I know last week we talked about God is motion, and life is motion, and to us death is I'm not doing anything and I'm not motion, there's no more motion, but
Mhm.
it really triggers the part of me that is eternal, that will not die. And so I have to really assimilate that, because if that's true, that God is life and God is motion, then just to let go and to shed the caterpillar body and to find the wings to fly into this next transition. I think there's also that psalm that says, I'll fly away when my time on, I even heard it put to music once. I mean, I don't know that it would be a Sunday morning worthwhile offering, but
Oh, we used to
but
sing that song at the other church. Absolutely.
I know, but so I think it's fearing the lack of motion, because that's all we know. And we have to trust
Yeah.
with everything in us that my last breath here opens to a whole new world.
The unknown also allows us to project our fears into it. We may not be afraid of the unknown. It's just the unknown creates a circumstance where we then can generate what could happen that we would be afraid of. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? And that's part of our inability to tolerate ambiguity, because it presents us with the choice to imagine either negative in our future or do something other than that.
You know, it's interesting when I talk to people and they may say that they're afraid of dying, but when you really dig down beneath the statement, what you find is they're not so much afraid of death as they're afraid of the dying process. They're afraid of the pain that may be involved, or whatever that process might be. And then when other people say they're not afraid of death at all, if you dig down beneath that, then you realize it's because they're more afraid of life and they want to escape it. You know, and so you know, it's something that we need to, I think, again, be aware of. We were talking yesterday about, you know, exploring ourselves and not leaving any of ourselves unexplored under the rock, and so to take a look at that and to really dig down for ourselves and find out where are our motivations really, where are our fears really, is an important thing, because those are the things that are limiting us. Those are the things that are keeping us defended. And we're trying as hard as we can through our spiritual formation and along Jesus' way is to become undefended, to really allow ourselves to be seen as we are and to be vulnerable with each other so we can really connect. And that's when we feel alive and life has meaning and purpose. And ultimately a sense of identity, who we really are.
And Dave, going back to George's question, like I was thinking about this idea of weakness is becoming strength and strength is becoming weakness, and that kind of cyclical way of reasoning. And fear might feel like weakness, but it's through the process of embracing the fear and accepting the fear can we begin to develop bravery, which is something you talked about with doubt and faith, right? So it's not one or the other at all. It's this constant movement, like Nina was talking about, of incorporating and blending the two into one, because they're really one thing.
Yep. There is no courage without fear. There is no faith without doubt. They are not diametrically opposed to each other. You know, they need each other for each other to even exist. So it's a whole different relationship. And if we can start to get those kind of relationships, a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the continuums, you know, the virtue continuum and the continuum that we've talked about between good and evil, Taba and Bisha, as unripe and ripe. You know, those continuums are much more useful in terms of looking at what seem to be dualities in life, you know, these pairs of opposites that are in diametric opposition, and they're really not, you know, we're steps along a spectrum. And so that can really change the way that we look at things too. We want to erase as many of those dualities as we go. So to finish off this section, he says, empiricism has been spectacularly successful in making the physical world more understandable and more comfortable to live in. They put a man on the moon and brought him back again. It gave us electricity in our homes, gasoline in our SUVs, cell phones and iPods in our pockets. Yet parsing experience in this way has also led to what the 20th century philosopher A.N. Whitehead called misplaced concreteness. By this he meant that our modern world bestows greater reality to the abstract principle than to the flow of experience. We value the hidden substance more than the present manifestation. We cling to the changeless rather than to joyfully greet the creatively new. Ultimately, we fill our world with all kinds of objects, which in turn often seem to growl back to us their sullen "I object." Nevertheless, even if empiricist culture tends to make our everyday lives somewhat sterile and boring, most of us are happy to let it do so because every so often it also gives us the means to fly to Mexico in order to savor a sunset over a really good margarita. You know, when you think about what he's saying here, think about how the ancient peoples lived in a magical world, right? When there was fire and not fire, when there was cloud and lightning over the mountaintops, the gods were there, right? When they went out at night and they saw the expanse of stars and they saw all the images in the stars, their gods were there, the spirits were there, you know. In just walking through the woods, the trees were alive and the rocks were alive. They lived in a magical world. They didn't have these rational explanations for everything the way that we do. And so they experienced them in a completely different way. The same way our children experience the world until they get old enough and they can start eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil themselves. And then we pour into them, you know, our Western mindset, culture, and worldview. And then they start losing the magic of the world around them. What we're looking for, of course, is a balance. We're not going to lose our empiricist view of things because that's what is going to power our world for as long as we can see. But we also want to balance that and say, you know, the flow of the experience of these things, even if we're understanding them digitally, even if we're understanding them, you know, all dissected and out on the table, we can still put that aside and enter into a moment and experience just the flow of it and return to that magical, mystical space. And that's the balance that we're trying to achieve in our spirituality. But it's so different. We look at the world so differently, and we don't even realize how we've kind of eviscerated the experience of just living life.
I want
We
to.
look at those as primitive, we look at them as immature, but we don't value that we can balance these things. I'm sorry, was that you, Ellen?
Oh, yeah, I want to add. I actually listened to this podcast called BioLogos, and actually, it's an institution that's started by Francis Collins. He was the biologist who headed the Human Genome Project, and so he's a very religious, spiritual person. So he has these speakers. All of them are scientists, actually. And what they're saying too is there's one that is, and I love what he said. He says, you see the rainbow, you see the beauty of it, but the physics of it, the prism, the one where you divide the optics and the lights, the explanation itself too is beautiful to understand. And the other person too was more a botanist. You guys know the Fibonacci series where there's four and then 8,
Mhm.
16, etc., etc. That's the pattern, the mathematical pattern of a flower or other things, or the shell. So that also is beautiful. Although it's very scientific, it has beauty in it. And it's, I mean, one can see it as very spiritual too. It's not just empiricist just for the science of it, but there's also beauty and religiosity in the
Yeah, that's exactly the
pursuit
kind of
of that
balance we're
knowledge
looking
and
at.
explanation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes, there is beauty in the empirical reality, right, as well. But we still have to be able to step back and see it and appreciate it, and then balance it with just having your margarita on the back deck.
Mhm.
So the question is, can we enjoy the useful fruits of empiricism without falling prey to its habit of draining experience until it becomes dreary and dry of feeling and imagination? Hopefully we can. Otherwise, there will never again be any real reason to order margaritas as the sun slips into the Pacific off the shores of Puerto Escondido.
He
So
really wants a margarita,
he
doesn't
really
he?
wants that margarita, right? It's a metaphor, William. Come on, man. So, in our fear, we're looking for the certainty, and empiricism has given us the the illusion that we can be certain about everything, right? It's given us that illusion that we can do that. And within certain parameters, it works. It actually does. But you exceed those parameters in any little way, whether it's velocity or size or whatever, and then suddenly we're not so certain anymore. And we're realizing at the quantum level, there is no certainty. I mean, quantum mechanics is just mind-bending because it just completely disallows us from certainty. When you get into quantum entanglement and you get into quantum leaps and you get into all these different crazy aspects, you realize, we can't even be certain of the physics themselves. So at some point, if we can't just embrace the mystery, even as we continue to push on the edges of what we can know scientifically, then we're really not fulfilling our purpose here as human beings. This is the balance that we're trying to strike. So what's going on here? How does this have anything to do with the Enneagram? How does this have anything to do with Taoism? Is he just taking a huge bunny trail here or what? Well, here's what he did. In the first part of this appendix, he gave us the history of the Enneagram. But in the second part, he's giving us the philosophical assumptions of the Enneagram. In other words, he's giving us the worldview that produced the Enneagram in the first place. The Enneagram is ancient. The Enneagram came out of this worldview that looked at life in a very different way, a non-empiricist way, a holistic way. It wasn't digital. It wasn't dissected on the table. And this is the worldview that produced the Enneagram, this tool for our spiritual transformation. And so to understand the worldview that produced the Enneagram is the prerequisite to understanding the Enneagram itself. And to the extent that we are going to value that ancient worldview is the prerequisite to making the Enneagram real to us as a tool for spiritual transformation. This other worldview that is the worldview that Jesus is showing us, the ancients are showing us, is the more spiritual experience of life as opposed to the scientific method. We need both. But if we're going to use the Enneagram, we need to know where it comes from and what kind of worldview that gave rise to it and is going to be useful for us to enter into as we're moving down the spiritual journey. And then from here, he's going to take it and he's going to marry it with the Taoist tradition in Appendix C. So we got a little time. We can dive into Appendix C, maybe get into a couple of paragraphs here. But before we do that, any thoughts on all of that stuff?
Yeah, Dave, could I jump on a question here?
Absolutely.
So in the historical context of the sort of roots, I guess, of the Enneagram, how did it miss what we've come to call as the Holy Land? It seems like it was all around there and just missed a whole chunk of the Eastern Mediterranean on the way to wherever it was going, Spain, Morocco.
How did it miss the Holy Land?
Yeah. I mean, to put it in one way, we had people there, and they missed this whole thing.
If I understand your question correctly, it obviously wasn't part of Jewish expression.
Yeah, missed Jewish expression, probably some others too, I can't guess, but
it was part of the ancient Desert Fathers and Mothers expression. And so you move forward in Christianity into the 3rd and 4th century, when the beginning of the Christian monastic movement, the Enneagram was in use in their practice. And a lot of it is coming forward from them. So yes, it didn't exactly miss the Levant, if you want to think of it from a geographical point of view, but it wasn't something that we find in Jewish tradition that I'm aware of at all.
Do I get a follow-up?
What's that? Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just curious what kind of mindset would reject the Enneagram. And if you can speculate on that, because as a sort of expert in 1st century Judaism, there might be some way to go.
I can't really speculate beyond saying this. What Judaism had become by the time Jesus comes on the scene was highly legalistic. In fact, that is the crux of what Jesus is fighting against. Just as Taoism itself was a response to what Confucianism had become in the 200 or 300 years before Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu come on the scene. Judaism had the same 300 years or so of developing the rabbinic worldview before Jesus comes on the scene. And both of them, the Taoists and Jesus, are trying to dismantle that legalist system and bring it back to a more mystical connection. Originally, the Jews are very mystical, but the rabbinical tradition had turned it into a very legalistic kind of expression. By 70 AD, of course, that is destroyed in Israel, except that one rabbinical tradition, the Pharisees, continues on, and it became what Judaism is today, rabbinical Judaism as codified in the Talmud. But what you have later on, especially flowering in the Middle Ages, is Jewish mysticism in the Kabbalah. And you don't see the Enneagram per se that I'm aware of, but you see many types of motifs and symbolism that is along these lines in Kabbalah. Pretty much every human tradition has a mystical branch, pretty much. And so those mystical branches, they're diving into what we were talking about, the perennial wisdom, right? The perennial tradition. And so that deep wisdom, that universal wisdom, is what we are supposed to be extracting out of the Enneagram as we use it in this way.
I have a question. In the same way that God gave Adam the ability to name all the animals, representing his that he had domain over the animals, does giving names to 9 types sometimes allow us to have domain over the types? Is that
Yeah. Which is one reason I've been sort of resisting the Enneagram for all these years, because that's what I saw. I saw it used badly that way, where it became exactly what you're talking about, Brady. It became, just a way of labeling people, labeling ourselves, as if to, put some sort of control or get some absolution. This is just the way I am. I was born this way. I'm an Aquarius. I'm a 9. I'm going to be slothful. I'm going to be a procrastinator. Don't blame me. And so what we want to do is to cut through that tendency for us to use it as a name or a label. And what's really gonna, you guys are really gonna like this next appendix C, because what he's gonna bring up, are there really only 9 types in the Enneagram, or are there 10? Are there really only 9 types which absolutely are defining each one of us on Earth? Or is there a 10th that transcends each one of those, right? And that 10th is going to end up being that pivot of the Tao. It's going to be the center of the wheel. It's going to be the space that transcends everything else. And so wherever it is that we have to date, taking a snapshot of our personality to date, that would tend to define us as one of these 9 types, our goal, though, is to transcend that and move into the 10th type. And so whether that floats your boat or not, it's an interesting concept, but it also addresses what you're talking about, Brady. We do not want to just be naming and labeling ourselves, but we do want to use those names and those labels to understand how it is that we're processing now so that we can bring the unconscious up into the conscious, and then we can change what needs to be changed and radically accept the rest, to use a little DBT language there.
Dave,
Yeah.
I have a comment going back to Bill's question a couple minutes ago. It's like the gift of perennial wisdom is available to the Levant. You look at the, where Jennifer brought up Gaza, the Sufis and Sufism, and the development of the richness of their seeking such a deep relationship with the eternal, or this experience of God as who he is, was available to them too, and is available to them too. And it's available to us too, and I mean, how did it start with, American culture? I think we started off on a good foot, but I tend to think that greed and consumerism and convenience took over everything. But there's always another offering for those who are true seekers. I know someone had said that Bill Wilson's gift to the world of spirituality was the offering of the 12 steps as the opening to a path of a way through to discovering a power much bigger than we are or have ever known. But when you read Rumi or or Thich Nhat Hanh or Chuang-Tzu, all the monks, and it's so rich, and it is so available almost to anyone who was seeking it. Where, you bring in Catholicism, there's the saints. There were all through the ages, it's always been there, but to us, this is kind of a new thing. And I think there's almost this creepiness if you go to these legalistic settings where you mention the Enneagram, even the picture, I've had people come in my house and say, oh, that's satanic. Get rid of that book. I'm like,
Yeah.
Okay, we're putting, we're back at square one over here. I'm not even bothering. It's like, okay, we're done, say what you need, and there's the door. I don't have, there's nothing in, I'm not going there. But it's available. And that's what I think you're opening through your being an intellectual, seeking so deeply, to just say it's just a door for those who are interested. Because empiricism will not take us there, because it's not meant to.
And we do need to make a distinction between the Enneagram and perennial wisdom. Obviously, perennial wisdom is available, as you say, Nina, to everybody. And Jesus is all about perennial wisdom. What is he teaching us but the perennial wisdom? Of course. But it wasn't codified into the Enneagram in Jewish culture or tradition. But the Enneagram is another way of, kind of like the 12 steps, our way of approaching the perennial wisdom. So is the Enneagram. It's just another circuit. It's another way of approaching it, and a very good way of doing it if we are looking at it this way and not just as another set of labels. And so that's important to make the distinction.
So maybe this is too off target, Bill, but when I went with my girlfriend up to Northern California to visit, on the way back, we went to Harbin Hot Springs, and it's a clothing optional hot springs. And my girlfriend and I were the only two people wearing a swimsuit at the facility. And so talk about not using your eyes, trying to use other senses, and, knowing that we were in the minority, and, wanting to feel comfortable in this beautiful place. And it was something that I had to kind of not rely on the things that I normally do with, in a setting. And it was enjoyable because I kind of just went with the flow and used other senses other than my eyes to experience it and experience the people. And so maybe back with when the Holy Land, maybe they were so legalistic that certain things that they never even experienced it out of fear of, that this is sin or something. And so I think some of this is just trying to open us up to maybe that 10th Enneagram.
I will say the effect is truly like a box of chocolates. You just never know what you're going to get. I do think that's the first time in 22 years as a pastor that a nude beach has been used as a metaphor. Good job, Jennifer.
Well, you gotta try it, then tell me what you think.
No, I don't. That's one of the things that's not on my list.
The receptionist said, I never go without clothing because inevitably my coworkers will be there looking at me. So I wasn't compelled to do like everybody else.
Any last comments about this? I mean, this is some pretty dense stuff. So hopefully it's coming across.
Sorry,
And the
just
more we
waiting to
talk
see.
about it. Go ahead, Bill.
It's too late now. Just waiting to see how you're going to land this plane.
It could be a bumpy ride.
Buckle up. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah. No, I think you are really going to like the next one. It's going to start to put things together. It also is going to dive us into Chuang Tzu, and that gets pretty dense. But I think the way he handles it and explains it, I think we'll be able to get a clearer understanding of why he thinks the Tao is an important way for us to understand the Enneagram, and why the two together can make our concept of the Enneagram stronger as we then move into it. Obviously, conceptualizing it alone does not much, but to have a strong concept at the beginning can keep us from a lot of dead ends as we start to actually engage the journey. And for those of you who are really familiar with the Enneagram and have already taken that journey to whatever extent, hopefully it's going to bring a lot more rich understanding of what it is that it's all about. So, all righty. Cool. Well, then let's leave it there. We're actually ending on time. Can you believe it?
Ellen, do you have anything to say?
I'm sorry, what's that?
I said, Ellen, do you have anything to say?
Oh, don't do that.
Actually, I do.
Okay. Not until next week, okay?
Right, but it's chapter 2 for Jennifer. I live in the part of Fullerton that has a lot of Korean spas, and I've been invited, and I'm afraid to.
You live in Sunny Hills, right?
Yes.
That's where I went to high school.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry, Dave. Forgive me for I have sinned.
Go ahead, Scott.
Lord, thank you for this time together and what we've learned and what we still have to learn, and our fellowship and sharing with each other and encouraging each other, and just all the different aspects of our life. We're grateful for it, Lord. We're grateful for you and your love for us. So we say our thanks and we say our amens in Jesus' name, and just thank you, Lord. It was a good time. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks,
Thanks,
God.
everybody. Oh, look at that great picture. You got Vaughn and William down there.
Yeah.
I always love that shot. Great shot. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. We'll see you on Sunday.
See you.
All
Thank you,
right.
guys.
Thanks, Dave.
I'll see you on
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Hey, Vaughn. What's going on? That is a nice picture. I haven't
It's a
seen that
great
in a
shot.
while.
Was that Dana Point, William?
Yes.
Yeah, looking
Yes.
down.
Mhm.
Yeah, looks like it's from the chart house or something like that, somewhere around there.
Yes, somewhere up there.
Okay.
Mm.
Jordana, good night, dear.
Bye.
All right.
Good night,
Good
Nina.
night, guys.
See you
Bye-bye.
guys.